Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. It is all coming out now. A supposedly legitimate political race for the nation's highest office, undermined by collusion between a candidate and a powerful outside actor. American voters repeatedly lied to. Now our democracy is quaking beneath the blow of it all. We're referring, of course, to the 2016 Democratic presidential primary. That party reeling from a recent piece in Politico by former acting DNC chair Donna Brazile. In the article, which is taken from her upcoming book, Brazile says the DNC essentially handed itself over to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, giving the Clinton campaign control over fundraising, strategy, and financial decisions. They even had veto power over hiring at the DNC. The revelation is shocking, even among people who suspected it was true, and it's now splitting the Democratic Party. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts now says the 2016 race was, quote, rigged in the primaries. Current DNC Deputy Chair Keith Ellison of Minnesota, who supported Bernie Sanders, said the party is betraying millions of voters. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, however, says, stop talking about it. Time to move on and focus on the next election and not feud over the last one. What about voters, though? Do they have a say in all of this? Should they have had a say? Christy Setzer is a Democratic strategist, president of New Heights Communication, and joins us tonight. Christy, thanks a lot for coming on.
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks, Tucker.
How is this not the definition of corruption?
Well, I know that Donna Brazile would like to sell some books. However, she fails to account for two things. The main argument that she makes in this supposedly explosive piece is, one, that when she got to the DNC, two things were happening. One, it had been mismanaged, and two, she felt that people there had their finger on the scale for Hillary. Well, guess what? We already knew that. And that is why several people resigned at the convention and she took over. So it's really old news here, and I'm a little confused as to why we're focused on it.
Well, I don't know why we're attacking Donna Brazile personally, whom I'll remind you is a woman of color. But I don't think that your response, just using the rules that you guys set up, that your response accounts for the claims that she makes. She says there was an agreement, explicitly signed, a legal agreement between the Clinton campaign in August of 2015, a year before the primaries ended, and the DNC, giving the Clinton campaign financial and hiring control over decisions at the DNC. That seems like corruption. I don't know how else you would describe that.
No, it's not. So here's what actually happens, and I'm sure this happens on the Republican side as well, which is that when someone has secured their party's nomination, essentially they start acting as one with the party committee.
Right.
So it seems as though the Clinton campaign decided to make this agreement early, which said, hey guys, when I actually secure the nomination, you know that we're going to have some say over the communications director, over some of the strategy, things like that. That, to me, does not seem out of the ordinary.
Yeah, that's not actually what it said. And I mean, look, if you're making the point that both parties try to rig the system in favor of the candidate they want, you're absolutely right. And the Republicans tried to do that, and they failed. And that's how they got Trump. No, it's true. Both parties try to rig it. But my question is, don't voters have a say in this? The party doesn't belong to the people who are paid by it. It belongs to the voters who vote for it. And to make an agreement like this before they get to vote seems to me an act of undermining democracy.
It's not at all. I mean, the states are the ones who control the primaries. The DNC and party committee staffers really have, frankly, very little role in that. So no. And the other thing is that I think there's a suggestion here that that it was so unfair as to that something might have changed the outcome. Hillary Clinton won the primary by 4 million votes. So it's really hard to see how this could have gone down any other way. And again, to look back on, would this change things so that, she wouldn't rightfully become president? Well, she's not in office right now, so it's hard to know why this matters so much.
I mean, these are all hypothetical questions, but what we do know is that the system was not on the level. It was rigged. And I'm not a Democrat, but a lot of people who have devoted their lives to the party are saying that. Here's what Tulsi Gabbard, who at one point was a vice chair of the DNC, you can't say she's not a Democrat, quote, the campaign finance laws, and I'm quoting, essentially allowed the Clinton campaign to bypass individual contribution limits by funneling millions of dollars to the DNC, taking control of the DNC in the process. She's not selling a book. That's a real accusation from a lifelong Democrat.
It's not an accusation. What it is again, to go back and think about what had happened here, Hillary Clinton, took the DNC when they were in a ton of debt, when they were basically bankrupt, and got them out of bankruptcy. Raised a lot of money for the DNC, raised a lot of money for state parties, and then, basically said, hey, and we're also going to want some say in how that money is used. And that's not so unfair. As I understand it, the same agreement was basically offered to Bernie Sanders' campaign as well. He chose not to raise money for the party. And look, that sets up a larger contrast between the fact that Hillary Clinton has been a Democrat largely all her life. She talks about how she was a Goldwater girl. And then, and has been.
And Bernie's not really a Democrat. I mean, I love that Bernie's not really a Democrat argument. Look, he voted with the Democrats his entire career in the Senate, as you well know.
Yeah.
But how about someone who has been a Democrat consistently, Elizabeth Warren, saying the system is rigged? Is she not a real Democrat too? I mean, look, the point is this is not just Donald Trump or right-wingers like me trying to cause trouble in your party. These are actual Democrats. What do you think Joe Biden thinks of this, for example, who got shafted because the DNC put its thumb on the scale when it shouldn't have? And let's just admit that it's corruption.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that people like, Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders have a legitimate complaint to say that on a personal level, the staffers at the DNC probably preferred Hillary Clinton. I think that is true. I think that the debate schedule was unfair, et cetera. But I don't think that you can say that from abroad. I just really don't think that this is being made into. Yeah.
When Democratic National Committee staffers who are bound, I would say honor bound, to remain neutral in the nominating contest, are figuring out ways to impugn Senator Sanders because of his religion, and they were caught doing that.
Yeah.
You think that's not corrupt?
I don't think it's corrupt. I think it's human that they had preferences, and I think that look, on the GOP side, I'm sure that was the case as well. I mean, you may remember that Priebus wasn't terribly excited about the idea of Donald Trump.
I'm not contesting that. The Republican Party didn't want Donald Trump. He bulldozed them and won. They tried to rig it too. I mean, that's true. I'm just saying it's not supposed to work this way. The Democratic Party just got caught rigging an election, and they should just admit it and apologize and maybe bring a little democracy into the process. That's all I'm saying.
I would disagree with that assessment. I don't think that it was rigged. I think that Hillary probably did have outsized control for a lot of reasons, but again, it didn't change anything ultimately.
Yeah, unknowable. Christy, thank you for that.
Thank you, Tucker.
Last year, CNN President Jeff Zucker gave an interview to a publication, Variety, for a puff piece literally entitled "How Jeff Zucker Made CNN Great Again." Pretty hard-hitting story. In the piece, Zucker explained his formula for greatness. Hard news, and yet more hard news. Quote, he said, "I think our air, as opposed to others, is truly fair and balanced." Zucker said that, apparently without snickering. Which raises the question, how much CNN does Jeff Zucker actually watch? Has he seen Jim Acosta lately? Acosta is CNN's senior White House correspondent. That's a title that suggests journalism rather than uninformed commentary. And yet here's Acosta from just 2 days ago unloading what is clearly a pre-rehearsed little editorial on CNN's air. Watch.
I think President Trump, Brooke, now has the world record for injecting politics into the aftermath of a terror attack. That is exactly what has happened in the last 12 hours or so, as the president has been tweeting about this.
This president won a world record for injecting politics? According to Jim Acosta, reporter, that's, quote, exactly what happened. Can we get some documentation for that claim? A certificate from the Guinness Book, maybe? Did CNN's most visible hard journalist just accidentally slip into third-rate punditry? Looks that way, and it probably wasn't by accident, actually. As a veteran Acosta watcher, we've noticed a theme here. Here's a greatest hits reel.
I think we saw the president's true colors today, and I'm not sure they were red, white, and blue. He is ushering in a Cold War, a return to the Cold War between Washington and Havana. They were not just seeing a press conference go off the rails or jump the tracks. You were watching a presidency go off the rails and jump the tracks. At times, this White House has an unhealthy fixation on what I call the 3 M's, the Mexicans, the Muslims, and the media.
You count the cliches in all those statements. There's a lot more of that, but you get the point. Keep in mind that as of this morning, Jim Acosta was still listed as CNN's senior White House correspondent. Now, that's a different job from being a talking head on one of those panel shows with 19 guests, all of them minor political consultants. At least it's supposed to be a different job. Is Jeff Zucker watching any of this? Joe Concha writes about the media for The Hill. He watches all of it, and he joins us tonight. Look, Joe, I'm not attacking Jim Acosta for bad punditry at all, though obviously that's bad punditry. But I'm kind of wondering what the boundaries are. I mean, if you're a White House correspondent, supposedly committing journalism, gathering facts, bringing them to your audience, how can that person coexist with the person we just saw?
It cannot, Tucker. I mean, as far as reporters are concerned, you could say that Jim Acosta is the face of the anti-Trump movement. And that's fine if he's an activist or even an opinion host like yourself. The problem is, as you've noted, he is a senior White House correspondent for one of the largest news organizations in the world. And what that does to CNN by extension, fairly or not, because there's plenty of good reporters over there, it gets labeled as not an objective news network that leads with facts first, but as the opposition party. And if you talk to folks within the administration, and I have, and you ask them, are Jim Acosta's day-to-day antics in terms of making himself the story, is that good or bad for you? And they enthusiastically say yes, because he is making our argument for us that not only is the media as a whole, because now they could use a broad brush, negative towards us, but they treat us with hostility, and they're actually, during these press briefings, taking a side on a position and openly debating us on it. That's not what White House senior correspondents do.
Well, it's not. It's not. And, you know, for all the grief that Fox takes, mostly because of shows like this, that I'm jumping around, getting your face with my opinion, and I get that's fine. Our guys at the White House don't behave like that. I mean, they're not running around giving little editorials about things. They never have been like that. Does no one else notice that this is happening at CNN? And by the way, I should just say, you're right. There are some really good people at CNN. I know them. I used to work there. And there still are. But Jim Acosta seems to discredit them.
And you're saying, is anybody noticing it? Well, of course they are. I mean, he's one of the most visible people on the network. A lot of people watch the press briefings. It beats some soap operas on major news networks. That's a true fact. Let me read you. There was a profile on Acosta in Politico at the end of September. And this is how the last paragraph reads. Acosta took a last sip of his beer, content that, and I'm going to accentuate the words here that tell you everything wrong about the way he's going about his job. Content that he was on the right side of history. Quoting Acosta, people are going to look back at this moment and ask each and every one of us, what did you do when Trump was doing this to America? What role did you play? Now, that's taking a side and saying that my ideas are better than your ideas and my worldview is more righteous than yours.
He sounds like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Was he a theologian or something? I thought he was a German theologian who was murdered for his beliefs by the Nazis. I mean, the point is he makes it sound like he believes he has a moral mission, when I thought he was supposed to be a reporter.
Yeah, and the problem is that it's not just Jim Acosta, but other pundits at that network. The CNN political analyst, Brian Fallon, he was the national press secretary for Hillary Clinton. I asked your producers to put together this tweet, to put it on the screen, because it really just shows you what an analyst, a political analyst, should not be doing. He says that's a live look at Ed Gillespie campaign strategy meeting. He tweeted this out last week. Ed Gillespie is running for Virginia governor as a Republican. He came out against Charlottesville and that violence and that horrible day that happened there more than anybody. And you have an analyst doing that. Or you have April Ryan, who is a White House reporter for American Radio Urban Networks, but also is a CNN contributor and is on that air quite often. And she asked the press secretary just 2 days ago, do you think that the administration thinks that slavery is wrong in the U.S.? You don't ask a question like that, Tucker, if you want a meaningful answer. You ask a question like that to make yourself the story and get retweeted and go viral.
I love how they're attacking Ed Gillespie as some kind of extremist. I mean, he's so moderate.
Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, anyway. Someone told me the other day that Keith Olbermann isn't well. Have you heard that?
Keith Olbermann, since the theme tonight is making yourself the story, obviously likes to say things that are provocative and over the top. That is not what's surprising. But on The View, and I don't know if you have this soundbite, but on The View, oh, you do? Okay, if we could play that real quick.
You said recently via tweet that Trump and his family have done more damage to America than bin Laden and ISIS combined.
Yes.
Do you believe that?
Yeah, we did really well after 9/11. I don't think the country has given itself enough credit for what we did not do after 9/11. We did not restrict all of the freedoms in this country. We did not single out people.
Is he okay? I mean, are other people concerned about him?
Well, I would imagine so. What I'm concerned more about, Tucker, did you hear the reaction of that audience who cheered when a guest compares a sitting U.S. president to the guy who carried out 9/11 and bin Laden that killed more than 3,000 people in New York, Pennsylvania, and New York and Washington, obviously, and then also says that President Trump is worse than ISIS, who just took credit for carrying out an attack just a couple of blocks from here that killed 8 people. And the crowd cheers that. And no co-host outside of Meghan McCain, who used to be with this network, actually stood up to him and said, that is ridiculous. We've lost our mind. This makes you hurt your hair.
Makes me a little nervous. Joe Concha, as always, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Got a Fox News alert. The NYPD says it may have a criminal case against disgraced producer Harvey Weinstein. For an update on all of that, we're joined now by Jonathan Hunt, who's got the latest. Jonathan?
Tucker, this is obviously a dramatic development in the Harvey Weinstein case, with the NYPD saying they are gathering evidence to prepare an arrest warrant, and that they believe the allegations made by actress Paz de la Huerta that Harvey Weinstein raped her in October 2010 are credible.
We have an actionable case here. So we're happy with where the investigation is right now. Mr. Weinstein is out of state. We would need a arrest warrant to arrest him.
What makes your story so credible?
The ability to articulate each and every movement of the crime, where she was, where they met, where this happened, and what he did.
Scores of women have now come forward with allegations of sexual harassment and assault by Harvey Weinstein. He has denied any criminal acts and is getting treatment for what he has called sexual addiction, although there have been various reports, Tucker, from TMZ and the New York Post's Page 6 that he is not taking that treatment seriously. He'll have little choice but to take this news from the NYPD very seriously indeed. Tucker?
Jonathan Hunt, reporting for us live. Thanks, Jonathan. Well, Army deserter Bo Bergdahl learned his fate today. The sentence he received has some furious. We'll tell you why coming up. Bo Bergdahl is going free after he pleaded guilty to desertion and misbehavior before the enemy. A military court ruled today he should be dishonorably discharged from the military, demoted in rank, and fined $10,000. But he will receive no prison time. Is that just or not? Rob O'Neill knows a lot about this. He's a former Navy SEAL. He fired the bullets that killed Osama bin Laden, and he joins us tonight. Rob, thanks for coming on.
Tucker, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Give us some, and I know you have an informed perspective on this.
Yeah, I do.
Some context for what Bergdahl did.
Well, this is one of the many missions that I happen to be a part of. I was on the base when Bo Bergdahl walked off. I remember waking up and being told an American deserted, and then we had to go get him. And it was a large part of my team and a lot of other coalition forces that we actually stopped what we were doing in the war effort, which meant for our team, we stopped going against high-value individuals trying to get back into Pakistan to take on very, very high-risk missions to get this guy that we knew very well walked off the base as the villagers turned him over to the Haqqani network, and they tried to move them over to be in Pakistan. So we went night after night doing very, very dangerous stuff, and there were people killed. The Army was quick to dismiss. There was 6 soldiers that were killed between the August-September timeframe. Maybe they weren't necessarily going after Bergdahl, but they were in the right place, wrong time. They were killed. We had a lot of people killed. One of my guys from my squadron was shot. He would have died had it been with anyone else. He was hit in the femoral artery. The dog he was with was killed. Big gunfight because we landed in a spot. They landed in a spot where they shouldn't have, right on what we call the X, which is next to the target. My team actually went in to assist them with that fight. A lot of stuff went on that shouldn't have gone on. A lot of people were hurt, and it's all because this guy was a deserter, and it's that simple. And he did get rolled up by the Taliban, and he suffered a lot at their hands, but that's all because of what he did. His captivity, the stuff he went through, that is a punishment for what he did. Now, with this judge to just let him go, what about the people that were killed? What about the soldiers that were injured? What about the wife that said she can no longer hold her husband's hand because he can't move? He's in a wheelchair. He was shot in the head trying to save Bergdahl. Think about the countless high-value individuals we stopped going after that did escape what we would have done to them and maybe made improvised explosive devices that could have killed Marines later on because we didn't, the intangibles, all this war effort stopping because there's one guy left. I'd said before that I was going to keep my mouth shut hoping that the military judicial system would do something the right way, but I think this judge dropped the ball, and I think it's sad. I think it's something personal against this administration. I don't know what it is. I think the judge made a bad call.
So you said, just to go back to the beginning of what you just told us, that you knew from the outset that this was desertion. He had left intentionally.
We knew without a doubt.
We didn't know that. Those of us who were just covering this stuff, we were told by the Obama administration that we weren't clear. It wasn't clear how he was captured.
I mean, it was so bizarre. I've been in a lot of different spots. About 8 months after we finished the bin Laden raid, I was part of a team that might have been tasked to go rescue him out of a part of Pakistan where he knew he was. And the Obama administration sent their people there and tried to explain to us, well, we think this guy might have fallen back on patrol. I had to stop her in the middle of it and like, no. This guy walked off. I knew before my first cup of coffee that day, he's a deserter. We need to go after him simply because he wears the uniform. We never leave a man behind. And this poor dimwit doesn't know what he just got himself into. He did learn over the next 5 years. And like I said, he did get punished for that, but what the judge did today was wrong.
Virginia's gubernatorial vote is just 4 days away, and the race is ending in a really ugly way. Earlier this week, the Latino Victory Fund released and then pulled an ad that attacks Republican Ed Gillespie's voters as racists who want to murder children. Democrat Ralph Northam's campaign has tried to distance itself from the ad, which is self-evidently disgusting. But not everyone agrees with that. LaDawn Jones was a Democratic member of the Georgia House of Representatives. She says that spot is perfectly defensible, and she joins us tonight. LaDawn, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me back, Tucker.
So I guess what bothers me about the ad, I mean, it's clearly race baiting, but it's also factually untrue. There are no Gillespie voters that I'm aware of who have run anyone down with a truck. This ad is only designed to play upon people's racial fears, and it's hard to see how anyone could defend it. How could you?
Well, I find it interesting that you've managed to poll all of the Gillespie voters to find out what they do in their private time. But, as a political consultant,
I read the papers.
This ad up
wait, hold on. Has a Gillespie voter run down a minority child with a truck ever? I mean, do you know something I don't?
Do you know that? I know here in Georgia, there was just a woman convicted and given 30 years because she did go to an African-American child's party with her Confederate flag flying on her truck, and they drove in circles, as they called them, the N-word. So that happens. It happened in 2017, and it happened to me in the early 2000s.
Look, the awful things happen, for sure, and I never deny that. But this is a political ad in a governor's race aimed at a specific candidate and his voters, and there's no evidence that anything it suggests is true. There are no Gillespie voters who've done this. By the way, we just had a kind of mirror image of this in New York City this week, where a radical Muslim ran down people in a truck. One of the reasons they pulled this ad. Do you see any irony in that?
What I do see the most irony in is that in America, you can look at what happened in New York as terrorism, but when we talk about Charlottesville, in Virginia, where this race is going on, you pretend like that's not terrorism, as if that man with a Confederate flag on his car did not run over the poor woman, Heather Hayden. So that's part of the problem that we have.
So slow down. I don't know who you're talking about. I would never defend that. It's appalling. I think that is a kind of terrorism. I mean, of course, it evoked terror in people. No one's defending that, certainly not on this show. But the point is,
this is a political ad. But you're saying that this is a non-realistic ad. And in America, what you have to understand is that there are Americans who are really afraid of this.
Okay, but hold on. This ad is designed to win votes for a candidate away from another candidate, to terrify people. And the ad says, this guy supports running down minority children. And that's a lie. And it's the worst kind of racial demagoguery because it's preying upon people's fears. It's the kind of thing the left is always denouncing. Oh, it's racial demagoguery. Here you have an example of racial demagoguery, and you're endorsing it. Why?
Well, you know what else that the right does? The right always says, we don't have time to be politically correct. Well, let me tell you what's something that's not politically correct in America. In America, there are Americans who are as afraid of someone running them over with a Confederate flag as they are of radical Islamic terrorism.
Sure,
and instead of running from this and shaming it, you need to say, you know what, this is an uglier part of American history. And whether it has to do with Ed Gillespie or not, I don't know. But I know it's a reality here in Georgia. I know it was my reality when I was a child.
Okay, first of all, you don't have a separate reality from anybody else. Reality exists independent of your
I think
views
you have a
or
separate
my
reality.
Views. No, look, reality
because you're not
exists.
recognizing what America is showing right now.
I don't want to have a philosophical conversation with you. I just want to make the point that this ad accuses somebody specific, Ed Gillespie, of a specific crime that neither he nor his voters have committed. Therefore, it is a lie. But more than that, it is bad precisely for the reasons you just explained. People are scared. This makes them more scared on the basis of a lie. Therefore, it's demagoguery. It brings us farther apart. Do you see what I'm saying?
Poor Tucker. What you don't realize is that without this ad, there were already Americans who were afraid of this reality. This ad just depicts that. And the fact that you're running from it and trying to fight that is the problem with America. It's the problem with Republicans. This is something that we are truly afraid of. In the same way you are.
Therefore, I'm part of the problem? I'm totally confused. Is there an Ed Gillespie supporter who's done this? Who?
Yes, there is. You are part of the problem because not because you're objecting to a lie, but because you want to turn this into a lie. You want to turn it into as if Charlottesville never happened.
But
you want to
pretend
as if white. Actually, it is. This is Virginia. This is a governor's race in Virginia. This is exactly about Charlottesville.
What did that have to do with Ed Gillespie? I'm trying to be reasonable. I'm not sure you're capable of it, but I'm trying to walk through this slowly and ask you, how does what happened in Charlottesville relate to Ed Gillespie? Why is he responsible for it? I mean, maybe I'm too literal. Maybe I'm like caught in, ancient linear thinking.
No, you're trying to be literal. And you know why you're trying to be literal? You're trying to be literal because you don't want to recognize that there are white people in America that can be as bad and worse terrorists as the Muslim terrorists that are here. And you're defending this ad not because it has anything to do with Ed Gillespie. You could care less about Ed Gillespie. What you care about is what it depicts. You want to show that the Confederate flag is a part of our heritage. I salute one flag. That's the American flag.
Right. We're done. You're a deeply unreasonable person. I hope you never get near power. Next up, the GOP tax plan could have big consequences for business owners, Tesla drivers, and of course, our viewers, you, me, all of us. Should we pass it? We'll talk to Republican congressmen about what it means for you. That's next. The Republican Party revealed yesterday its plan for the biggest overhaul of the U.S. tax code since the Bush tax cuts of 2001. This bill would slash corporate tax rates, increase the standard deduction for ordinary families, and impose a new tax on the endowment revenue of wealthy universities, some of the richest organizations in world history. It is a complicated bill. Not all of it is clear, but from what we know, is it worth passing? Congressman Sean Duffy represents Wisconsin. He supports the proposal, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
It's good to be with you, Tucker. Thanks for having me.
So if the message of the last election was the middle class feels neglected and that an awful lot of Americans make less than their parents made, and if that's the core problem in American politics, and I think it probably is, how does this bill address that problem?
So two things. One, as you mentioned in your intro, we let more middle-income Americans keep more of their income, which is a great thing. We simplify the code so people don't have to go to their accountant and do itemized deductions. But I think the biggest part is we're in a global economy, Tucker. We have American businesses because our tax rates are too high. They leave our shores and they go to some foreign country for better tax rates. And so if we bring our corporate tax rates from 35 down to 20%, we're going to see American businesses actually come back home and bring their money back home and invest here in America. And when you have more investment, more business, that means more jobs for middle-income families with better wages, which is what this is all about, is how do we help the American family? And I think this package that Kevin Brady and our Ways and Means Committee put together is pretty awesome, considering the constraints that we had that the Senate gave us.
So let's just take one company, Apple. So it's close, its valuation is nudging toward $1 trillion. It's going to get a much bigger rate cut than any middle-class family, but it doesn't employ that many people, actually. So if this tax plan is good for Apple, how exactly will Americans benefit from that. You're confident they will?
So let's walk through the Apple example then. So when Apple makes money overseas, they keep that profit overseas. They don't bring it back home. The reforms in this tax bill will say, Apple, all the money that you've made overseas, we're going to tax you, and you'll have 8 years to pay it off. But you'll be able to bring it home on day one. And so because we lower the rates and make it easier to bring profits home, we think Apple will invest more in America and offer more American jobs. One of the reasons why Apple isn't here is the tax code has incentivized Apple to actually leave America and go somewhere else. This reverses that incentive and says, no, Apple, we want you to come back home and employ Americans in the innovative and creative jobs that make your products so wonderful. And by the way, Tucker, I haven't been able to get an iPhone 10 yet, but I'm working on it. I heard it's great.
I don't think it'll solve anyone's deeper problems. So let's say, let's just pick an example. Let's say my wife and I each make $45,000 a year. That puts us pretty solidly, I would say, the middle class. We live in Schenectady, New York. So $90,000 combined family income. How does this change our picture?
So what I can do is, I got the numbers for if you and your wife make $59,000, your tax rates will, your federal tax rates will go down by 75%. You'll pay 75% less than you do today. Okay. And your tax filing will be way easier. And what I find fascinating, Tucker, is Democrats who, you hear the mantra every day on your show and you push back on it, but Democrats say we need to not give tax breaks to the wealthy. We need to raise taxes on the wealthy and preserve breaks for the middle income Americans. And what we've done in this bill is pretty simple. We have driven all of the tax breaks towards middle Americans, and actually we've taken some of the tax breaks away for the wealthiest Americans. And we've seen Democrats all of a sudden become uncomfortable because they like the talking point of saying, no tax breaks for the rich. But when we actually accommodate them, the rich live in their districts. They have the limousine liberals who sip their lattes and love to talk about their social justice. But when we accommodate them, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, we want to make sure you can write off the interest on $1 million home. Well, where I live in Wausau, Wisconsin, Tucker, we don't have any $1 million homes. You're wealthy if you have a $450,000 home. So, but they can't stand that we're accommodating them, and the left-wing nuts are going crazy that they might pay a little bit more. They're not going to get the benefit that most other Americans are getting in this tax reform package.
The Democratic Party is the party of the rich. I mean, that's factually true now. But finally, what about the property tax write-offs that people in states with high property taxes, mostly, of course, blue states, liberal states, they can't write that off anymore under this plan, or to the degree that they could. So, how is that going to affect middle-class families?
So not to the same degree, but they can write up to $10,000 of their property taxes. Right. So, maybe your home, Tucker, you might not be able to write off the full boat, but a lot of people aren't paying, much more than $10,000. But also, you got to recognize that when you itemize, you now have gone from a $12,000 standard deduction to $24,000. So you have a whole group of people who won't have to itemize anymore. They'll have enough in the simplicity of the code to make it work for them. One thing I want to bring up to you, you've heard the New York, the high tax states, New York, California, New Jersey. They're concerned about their inability to write off their state and local taxes. Well, what's not oftentimes brought up is the fact that the alternative minimum tax actually doesn't let them write that stuff off anyway. So they're not really hurt by this code. They're just not helped as much as they would be if other people in low tax states.
Congressman, thank you for joining us and for that explanation. I appreciate it. Up next, a college professor has liberals howling for his job over a report he wrote about transgenderism. Why are they so mad? We'll talk to him next. Well, a professor at Boise State University in Idaho has thousands of people calling for his firing because he has violated the sacred liberal catechism on transgenderism. In a recent article for the Heritage Foundation and again for the Daily Signal, Professor Scott Yenner argued that transgender ideology is undermining the traditional family by affirming the right of children to change their gender, even if their parents object. A petition says Yenner ought to lose his job for saying this. So far, Boise State says his job is safe, though a dean has also issued a statement saying this rhetoric does not reflect the values of diversity, whatever that means. Professor Yenner joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Tuck, for having me.
So can you just explain crisply what you said that was considered so controversial by Boise State?
Well, it's one of those things it's almost difficult to know what precisely got everyone angry, because most people concede the point. that transgender rights can undermine parental rights. And so the general trope has been that I've said misogynist and transphobe and homophobic things in the article.
But you were just noting that if you allow a child agency, freedom to decide his or her gender, assuming you believe that's even physically possible, but if you let kids decide, then that undermines the right of parents to make decisions for the kid. So that's like a statement of fact, isn't it?
It seems to be a statement of fact. I mean, it's difficult to imagine what the family could look like if there weren't parental rights and parental authority that parents would have to raise their children the way they see fit.
So what kind of response did you get for saying something obvious?
Well, I'm not sure that anyone ever read my article, and I've been proud of my administration for always defending my right to write on what I would like and my academic freedom. But at the same time, they've said that I've engaged in hate speech and that I've created an unsafe environment and I've been uncivil. And I think that we're beginning to see at Boise State the conflict between a university that's committed to social justice and a university that's committed to rational inquiry. And that, to me, is the slow death of the modern university.
Yeah, or the quick death. It seems to be happening pretty rapidly. So in what way do they claim you're uncivil?
Well, I think the incivility that they see is that I don't affirm everyone's identity when I conduct my research on what the effects of identity politics are on the family. So I think that's the new definition of civility. You have to affirm people in their identity in order to be civil. Whereas the old understanding of civility, which I think fits with a university that's dedicated to rational inquiry, is you can agree to disagree politely with someone.
Right. Right. You can say, I have a different view, but I don't hate you for it. I mean, that was my operating understanding. So they have, in effect, denounced you in a very modern way by saying that what you said does not reflect their values of diversity. Now, I hear that phrase a lot. I have no actual idea what it means. Do you know what it means?
Well, I think I would go back to that understanding of civility, Tucker, that I think what diversity means is the need to affirm everyone in their own identity as they understand it. And the failure to do that makes you uncivil or maybe a person who perpetrates hate speech.
So I thought diversity was the idea you could have people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different views, and they could all kind of live together. It sounds like they're demanding uniformity rather than diversity.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great ironies, Tucker, that Boise State, for instance, has recently hired a diversity inclusion officer, and he is one of the primary people behind denouncing me in public. You know, he's blamed my articles for Charlottesville and genocide and called me a neo-Nazi. But what the effect of that is to make people without tenure and without the protections that come with an academic job less likely to speak, less likely to engage in ideas, and that's the diversity officer at the university.
So the diversity officer is demanding conformity, and no one sees that as Orwellian or totalitarian. Looking from the outside in at the university, not just yours, but so many of them, it seems like a grotesque joke to a lot of people like me who are parents of college-age children. Like, at what point do you think the rest of the country says, I'm not sending my kids to a place like that anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I would like, truth in labeling on campuses. If a campus isn't going to be dedicated to rational inquiry, they should just announce that they're dedicated to social justice and eradicating prejudices as they understand them, and allow people to choose which universities they're going to. It's not clear to me that there's enough intellectual diversity on any of these campuses to conduct a genuine constructive dialogue if those campuses are committed to social justice instead of rational inquiry.
And it's the diversity officer's job to stamp out intellectual diversity. This moment's going to get out in history as one of the craziest things that's ever happened in this country, and I appreciate your having the bravery to stand up right in the middle of it. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Tucker.
A sign outside a school is being treated as a hate crime because of what it said about white people. We'll tell you what it said next. Here's the lead of an actual Washington Post story. Quote, flyers saying it's okay to be white were found taped to the exterior doors of a Maryland high school Wednesday morning, apparently as part of an effort to spark racial division, unquote. Officials at Montgomery Blair High School in suburban D.C. say they ripped down those signs, called the cops, and are investigating security footage to find the monster who did it. The sentiment, "It's okay to be white," is now a hate crime. Okay, so what's the correct position? That it's not okay to be white? Being white, by the way, is not something you can control. Like any ethnicity, you're born with it, which is why you shouldn't attack people for it. And yet the left does constantly, in case you haven't noticed. So who's sowing racial division here? They ought to stop. These things never end well. That's it for us for the week. Have a great night. We'll see you Monday. Hannity's next.